Richard Whitmore ripped Nathan's will in half with both hands, slowly watching her face while he did it, and dropped the pieces onto the table in front of her. "That is what my son's wishes are worth to me." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to something cold and absolute. "You have 48 hours to sign the settlement. Because if this goes to court, I will destroy you so completely that your own name will feel like a humiliation." Emily stared at the torn signature. 10 years of marriage, 10 years of loyalty, torn in half by a man who believed his money made him untouchable. She folded her hands. "Then we go to court." If you have ever watched someone powerful use their money like a weapon against someone who had nothing left to lose, then you already understand what this story is about. Welcome, and if you are new here, please subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment telling us what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The morning Richard Whitmore walked into that conference room, he was already certain he had won. He had won before he sat down. He had won before he opened his mouth. He had won the way powerful men always win, not through truth, not through fairness, not through any quality that deserved to be rewarded, but through money, through influence, through the slow and suffocating weight of a family name that had been hanging over this city for 3 generations. I was 64 years old. His suit cost more than most people's monthly rent. His lawyers had lawyers, his accountants had accountants, and the woman sitting across the table from him was a 37-year-old interior designer whose bank accounts had been frozen for 11 days. Emily Carter. Emily Whitmore, as she had been legally known for 10 years, sat very still. She had learned stillness from Nathan. Nathan used to say that the most dangerous thing a person could do in a room full of powerful people was to let them see you flinch. He said it with the quiet certainty of a man who had grown up watching his father crush people for sport. He said it the way someone says a thing they learned by watching it happen to someone they loved. She had not understood back then exactly who he was warning her about. She understood now. Richard placed one hand flat on the stack of documents and leaned forward. His eyes were pale blue, the color of ice over a very deep lake, and they held exactly the warmth of that image. "I want you to understand something, Emily," he said. His voice was the voice of a man accustomed to being listened to. Low, deliberate, almost kind the way a threat can sound kind when it is delivered with perfect confidence. "This is not personal. This is a legal matter. The Whitmore estate belongs to the Whitmore family." Nathan understood that. He always understood that. Whatever he may have told you in the privacy of your marriage, whatever promises he made, those promises are not legally binding. That is simply the reality of the situation. Emily looked at him. She did not look away. "He was my husband," she said. "He was my son," Richard answered. "He is also gone. And now the rest of us have to make sensible decisions about what he left behind." Victoria Whitmore sat at the far end of the table. Nathan's mother. She had not spoken since the meeting began. She wore black still, though Nathan had been dead for 7 weeks. She held a tissue in one hand that she occasionally pressed to the corners of her perfectly composed eyes. Emily had once believed that Victoria was the gentler of the two, the one who loved Nathan without agenda, without calculation. She had believed that for almost 10 years. She understood now that she had been watching a performance. Victoria's grief was real. Everything else about the woman sitting at that table was a construction. "The documents are straightforward," said the lead attorney, a man named Gerald Fitch, who had represented the Whitmore family for 22 years. He had a voice like expensive whiskey, smooth, warm, slightly numbing. "Our position is that the amendments to Nathan's personal will were made under circumstances that call their validity into question. There is a precedent." "Which precedent?" Emily asked. Fitch paused. "Not long, but long enough. There are several applicable cases." "Name one," Emily said. The temperature in the room dropped 3 degrees. Richard Whitmore tilted his head slightly. He was recalibrating. She could see it. He had walked into this room expecting a grieving widow in shock, a woman who would sign because she was afraid, because she was alone, because she did not have the resources or the energy or the will to fight a family with the Whitmore name and the Whitmore money and 22 years of Gerald Fitch. He had not expected her to ask for a case name. "The documents," Fitch continued smoothly, redirecting, "outline a settlement that we believe is quite generous given the circumstances. The Foundation Trust will provide—" "I'm not signing anything today," Emily said. The room was silent. Victoria pressed the tissue to her eyes. Richard's jaw tightened by a fraction of an inch. "Emily," he said her name like a warning. "I strongly encourage you to reconsider. This process can be simple or it can be extremely difficult. That choice is yours. But if you force us to take this to a full court proceeding, we will be required to present certain information about your relationship with Nathan that I do not think you would want made public." Emily felt the cold move through her chest. Not fear. Something older than fear, something that felt like the moment a person understands, truly understands exactly what kind of person they are dealing with. "What information?" she said, keeping her voice level. "The circumstances under which Nathan changed his will," Richard said. "The nature of your influence over him in his final months. There are people who are prepared to testify." "Testify to what?" Emily asked. "To the fact that Nathan and I had a marriage, to the fact that he trusted me, to the fact that your son told me 3 months before he died that he had discovered something inside your company that he was planning to take to federal regulators." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. Richard Whitmore did not move. Gerald Fitch set down his pen. Victoria Whitmore stopped pressing the tissue to her eyes. "I think," Fitch said very carefully, "that this would be a good moment to take a short recess." Emily stood up. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door. She turned around one final time. "He warned me," she said. "He told me if anything happened to him not to trust everyone wearing his family's name. I thought he was talking about business partners." She looked at Richard. "I was wrong about that." She walked out. Her legs were shaking by the time she reached the hallway. She pressed her back against the wall and breathed. Once, twice, 3 times. The way Nathan had taught her to breathe when the world was moving too fast and her body wanted to collapse before her mind had decided to. She was not going to collapse. Not here, not yet. But she understood standing in that hallway that she had just made the most powerful enemies she had ever faced in her life. And she had done it with $11.42 in a savings account that was not frozen, a borrowed apartment in Lincoln Park, and a single friend who happened to have passed the Illinois bar exam. She pulled out her phone and called Rachel Morgan. Rachel picked up on the second ring. "How did it go?" Rachel asked. "I told Richard Whitmore that Nathan was planning to go to federal regulators," Emily said. A pause. "Emily, I know. That is either the bravest thing you have ever done," Rachel said, "or the most dangerous." "I know. Which do you think it is?" Emily looked down the hallway. Through the glass doors at the end, she could see the city moving outside. Traffic. People. The ordinary machinery of a Thursday morning in Chicago, entirely indifferent to the fact that her entire life had just been restructured without her permission. "I think," she said, "that there is no difference between those two things anymore." She had met Nathan Whitmore on a Tuesday afternoon in October, 11 years ago, inside a small antique bookstore on North Clark Street. She had been looking for a mid-century modern lamp for a client's renovation project. He had been trying to decide whether a leather-bound journal from the 1890s was worth the price the shop owner was asking. They had disagreed about the journal. Specifically, she had told him that paying $800 for a decorative object whose primary function was to sit on a shelf and communicate wealth to house guests was exactly the kind of vanity purchase that stopped being interesting after you had made it 3 times. He had stared at her. Then he had laughed. Then he had bought the journal and handed it to her. "Prove me wrong," he said. "Tell me something interesting that's inside it." She had opened it to a random page and read the first line she found. "A man who believes his money makes him interesting has confused the people around him for mirrors." Nathan had been quiet for a moment. "I would like to take you to dinner," he said, "so that you can continue being honest with me. It is an experience I almost never have." They were married 2 years later, and for 8 years after that, she had been honest with him. She had told him when his instincts were right and when they were wrong. She had told him when his family was manipulating him and when they were genuinely concerned. She had sat with him through the nights when the company was hemorrhaging money and the board was turning against him, and his father was making it very clear that he considered his son's leadership an embarrassment. She had watched Nathan pull the company back from the edge of collapse through 18 months of work that no one on the board ever fully acknowledged. She had been the first person he called when the turnaround was complete. She had been the last person to speak to him before he boarded that plane. "I found something," he had told her that morning. His voice was careful. the way it got when he was afraid of being overheard even in their own kitchen. Inside the company financials. Dad's been running something through the subsidiary accounts. I don't know how long, I don't know how much, but I'm meeting with someone in New York who used to work for the SEC, and if what I think is happening is actually happening, Nathan. She had put her hand on his. What are you saying? I'm saying be careful, he said. While I'm gone, don't tell anyone I'm looking into this. Not anyone. He had looked at her with an intensity she recognized the look he got when he was most serious, when the thing he was saying mattered more than the way he was saying it. And Emily, if anything goes wrong, if anything happens, trust Rachel, only Rachel. Do you understand me? She had told him she understood. She had watched him leave. She had been asleep when her phone rang at 2 a.m, and a voice she did not recognize told her that a private plane registered to Whitmore Enterprises had gone down over Lake Michigan, and there were no survivors. The grief had been total, absolute. The kind of grief that does not arrive gradually but simply replaces everything. Every ordinary thought, every routine, every sense of what the next hour is supposed to feel like with a single catastrophic absence. She had gotten through the funeral. She did not know how. She had gotten through the first week. She did not know how. And then, 8 days after they buried Nathan Whitmore in the family plot that his grandfather had established in 1961, Richard Whitmore called her into his study, sat her down across from a man she later learned was Gerald Fitch, and told her that a review of the estate documents had revealed complications. He used that word, complications. She remembered thinking the word was very clean for what he actually meant. What he meant was, we are taking everything. Rachel Morgan had grown up in Evanston, the daughter of a public defender who believed with evangelical conviction that the legal system was only as good as the people willing to fight inside it. She had graduated near the top of her class at Northwestern Law, spent 3 years at a mid-sized litigation firm in downtown Chicago, and then in what her former colleagues described as either a principled decision or a catastrophic career mistake, depending on who you asked, opened her own practice in a 2-room office on the north side of the city, where she mostly handled the kind of cases that large firms declined because they were difficult, and the clients could not pay what the work was actually worth. She was the person Emily called when she needed someone who would tell her the truth. Here is the truth, Rachel said, sitting across from Emily in the borrowed apartment 3 days after the conference room meeting. She had a legal pad on the table in front of her, covered in handwriting that Emily could not read from her angle. The Whitmore family has a trust that was established in 1987. Nathan was a beneficiary. You, as his wife, had certain rights under the terms of that trust. But the family's lawyers are claiming that a document executed in 1997 modified the original terms in ways that effectively limit spousal claims. They filed a petition to have Nathan's personal will amendments set aside on the grounds of undue influence. In plain language, they are saying you manipulated him into changing his will. That is a lie, Emily said. I know it is a lie, Rachel said. Proving it is a lie is a different project. What do we do? Rachel looked at her. What assets do you have access to right now? My savings account, $11. The borrowed apartment. It belongs to my cousin. She's letting me stay until I figure something out. Do you have anything of Nathan's, any documents, any communications, anything he gave you or sent you in the months before he died? Emily thought about the morning Nathan left, the careful voice, the instruction to trust Rachel, the thing he said about the company financials. He told me he found something, she said, inside the company accounts. He said his father had been running money through subsidiary accounts. Rachel went still. Did he tell you anything more specific than that? He was going to New York to meet with someone who used to work for the SEC. Did he tell you who? No. I was afraid of being overheard even in our own kitchen. Rachel wrote something on the legal pad. She stared at it for a moment. Then she looked up. Emily, I need you to think very carefully about this. In the months before Nathan died, did he do anything unusual? Did he go anywhere, contact anyone, leave anything behind that you didn't understand at the time? Emily closed her eyes. She thought about Nathan in the last months of his life. The way he had become quieter, more careful, the way he sometimes sat up after she had gone to sleep working in the study with the door closed and the lights low. The way he had started carrying documents in a briefcase with a combination lock when he had never used a locked briefcase in 10 years of marriage. The way he had looked at her sometimes with an expression she could not name, something between love and apology, as though he was preparing for a conversation he did not yet know how to begin. And she thought about the one night 5 months before the accident when he had taken her back to that bookstore on North Clark Street. No occasion, no reason she could identify. He had simply said over dinner that he wanted to walk through it again the way they had the first time. They had spent an hour in there. Nathan had moved through the shelves, slowly pulling out books and replacing them the way he always did when he was thinking through something he was not ready to say out loud. Near the back of the store, he had stopped at a shelf she didn't recognize. He had stood there for a long moment with one hand resting on the spine of a large green book. "Do you remember what you said to me?" he said, "the first time we were here. I told you that $800 for a vanity purchase was a mistake. You said a man who believes his money makes him interesting has confused the people around him for mirrors." He kept his hand on the book. "I've been thinking about that line for 11 years. I think I finally understand what it means." She had not asked him what he meant. She had assumed there would be time. "There was a bookstore," she told Rachel. "He took me back to the place where we first met, about 5 months before the accident. He stood at a shelf near the back of the store and kept his hand on a green book. He was trying to tell me something. I didn't understand it at the time." Rachel put down her pen. "Do you remember which book?" "No, but I remember exactly where the shelf was." There was a pause in which both women understood the same thing at the same time. "The family's lawyers have been watching you," Rachel said quietly. "They have almost certainly been monitoring your communications, your phone calls, your email. If we go to that bookstore, we cannot discuss what we are looking for before we go." "Understood," Emily said. "And Emily," Rachel leaned forward, "if Nathan hid something, if he left something behind for you to find, the Whitmore family cannot know that you have it until the moment it is introduced in a proceeding where they cannot suppress it. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Emily looked at her. "I understand exactly what you are telling me," she said. She went to the bookstore alone. She went on a Thursday afternoon dressed in the same way she always dressed, carrying the same bag she always carried, because she understood now that being watched meant that ordinary was a form of protection. She walked through the door of the bookstore and nodded at the owner, a man named Arthur, who had known both her and Nathan for a decade, and who asked after her with genuine kindness and waited a respectful moment after she answered, before returning to the novel he was reading behind the counter. She walked to the back of the store. She found the shelf. She began at the left end and moved right the way. Nathan always moved through shelves left to right, bottom to top, deliberate and unhurried. She pulled out books and replaced them. She was looking for the large green book. She found it on the third shelf from the bottom, a 1960s edition of a collected legal history of Illinois property law, hardcover green cloth spine, faded gold lettering. The kind of book that communicated serious purpose to anyone who glanced at it from across a room. The kind of book that no one ever actually wanted to read. She pulled it from the shelf. She felt the weight before she opened it. Something was inside the front cover, taped to the inside of the binding. A small envelope manila sealed with her name written on it in Nathan's handwriting. She pressed the book closed against her chest. She breathed once. She replaced the book on the shelf. She purchased a different book, an illustrated history of Chicago architecture that she had genuinely always wanted, and walked out of the store into the pale October afternoon. She did not open the envelope until she was inside Rachel's office with the door closed and Rachel sitting across the table. Inside was a small metal key and a note written on a single sheet of paper in Nathan's careful, familiar hand. "If you're reading this, then they already tried to take everything. I am sorry I couldn't tell you more. I am sorry I didn't have more time." The key opens a private storage unit at a facility on West Fullerton. The unit is registered under the name of my grandfather's first attorney. Look for the initials ERH on the unit number. Inside is what I found. All of it. Everything you need. Don't fight their lies. Find the truth. I love you. I always trusted you most. Emily read it twice. She set it down on this table. She looked at Rachel. Rachel looked back at her. "Okay," Rachel said quietly. "Okay, here is what we are going to do. The storage facility on West Fullerton was climate-controlled, fluorescent lit, and entirely indifferent to the drama that had led Emily Carter through its sliding glass doors on a Friday morning. The attendant checked her identification, confirmed the rental on the unit registered under the name of Edward Robert Hadley, the Whitmore family's original estate attorney, dead since 1999, and led her to a corridor of gray metal doors. Unit 147. She put the key in the lock. She turned it. She opened the door, and she stood in the entrance of that small, cool, silent space and understood for the first time the full scope of what Nathan had been carrying in the last year of his life. There were boxes, organized, labeled in Nathan's handwriting. The labels were careful and specific in ways that suggested he had been building this for months, not in a panic, not in a rush, but with the methodical patience of a man who understood that the thing he was constructing needed to be complete, needed to be defensible, needed to survive him if it came to that. She did not touch anything. She called Rachel. When Rachel arrived 40 minutes later, she stood in the doorway of that storage unit for a very long time without speaking. Then she said in a voice that was very quiet and very controlled, "Emily, I need you to understand something. What is in these boxes, if it is what I think it is, this is not just a civil case anymore. This is a federal matter. This is something that is going to be very public and very ugly, and the Whitmore family is going to fight it with everything they have." "I know," Emily said. "And I need you to understand that once we open these boxes and begin this process, there is no going back. There is no settlement. There is no quiet resolution. There is only the truth and whatever comes after the truth." Emily looked at the boxes, at Nathan's handwriting on the labels, at the evidence of all the months he had spent building this alone, afraid, carrying the weight of what he had found while managing the company and managing his family and managing the distance that was growing between him and the truth he had not yet found the way to tell her. He had trusted her with this. He had trusted her with the most important thing he had ever done. "Open them," she said. Rachel spread the contents of the first box across the table and did not speak for 11 minutes. Emily counted. She counted because she needed something to do with her hands and her mind, while Rachel read, and counting the seconds felt more productive than falling apart, which was the other available option. 11 minutes and 22 seconds. Then Rachel looked up. "Emily," she said, "how much did Nathan tell you about the subsidiary structure of Whitmore Enterprises?" "Almost nothing," Emily said. "He kept the business separate from our personal life. I knew the broad outlines. I knew the company had divisions. I knew some of them operated overseas." "Did he ever mention a company called Ardent Meridian Holdings?" "No." "What about a company called Clearfield Asset Partners?" "No." "Lakeview Capital Consultants?" Emily shook her head. Rachel turned one of the documents around so Emily could see it. It was a financial statement dense with numbers printed on paper that had the particular quality of something that had been generated internally rather than by an outside firm. At the top, Nathan had written 3 words in red ink: Shell Company's dad. "These 3 entities," Rachel said, keeping her voice level in the way that Emily had learned meant she was controlling something much larger underneath, "appear in Whitmore Enterprises' financial records as legitimate consulting partners. They receive payments, significant payments, quarterly going back at least 9 years. But when you try to find them as registered businesses, as entities with addresses, with employees, with any actual activity in the world, they do not exist. They are constructed. They are containers. And the money that goes into them," she tapped the document, "does not come out the other side in any way that can be explained by legitimate business activity." Emily looked at the red ink, Nathan's handwriting, Shell Company's dad. "How much money?" she asked. Rachel looked at her steadily. "Based on what is in this box alone, and understanding that what is in this box is almost certainly not the complete picture, somewhere in the range of $40 to $60 million over 9 years. The number sat between them like a third person in the room. "He stole it," Emily said. "He moved it," Rachel said carefully. "Where it went after it moved is what would need to be established. But yes, in plain language, Richard Whitmore has been systematically diverting company funds for almost a decade, and Whitmore Enterprises is not a private family business. In the traditional sense, it has institutional investors' pension fund exposure, a board of directors with fiduciary responsibilities. What Richard did is not a family financial matter. It is a federal crime." Emily stood up. She walked to the window and stood there with her back to the room. She thought about Nathan sitting in their kitchen on the morning he left, his voice careful and low, his hand on hers. I found something inside the company financials. She thought about the way he had looked at her, the apology in his eyes, the weight of something he was not yet ready to say out loud. I had known what this meant. He had understood exactly what he was carrying, and he had carried it alone for how long, months longer, because he was trying to find a way to do what was right without destroying everything in the process. Her husband had been trying to be a good man, and it had killed him. "Rachel," she said without turning around. "Yes, the plane." A pause. "I know," Rachel said. Nathan was on his way to New York to meet with someone who used to work for the SEC. He had found this. She gestured at the table without turning around. He was building a case. He was going to report his own father to federal regulators. And then his plane went down over Lake Michigan. She turned around. And now his father is in court claiming his son's estate. Rachel was very still. "I am not going to say what you are thinking out loud," Rachel said. "Not yet. Not until we have more. Because if we say it without enough evidence behind it, it becomes a conspiracy theory. And a conspiracy theory is something the Whitmore family's legal team will use to make us look desperate and irrational. Do you understand?" "I understand," Emily said, "but you are thinking it." Rachel held her gaze. "Yes," she said quietly, "I am thinking it." They worked through the night, box by box, document by document. Nathan's filing system was meticulous. He had organized everything chronologically cross-referenced across boxes, flagged the most significant items with colored tabs. Red for financial irregularities, blue for internal communications, yellow for what he had labeled third-party confirmations, which turned out to be a series of statements from a former Whitmore Enterprises finance director named Carol Ashworth, who had resigned from the company in 2019 and apparently spent the following 2 years responding to Nathan's quiet, persistent questions with increasing levels of specificity. By 3 in the morning, Emily understood the shape of what Nathan had built. It was not just evidence of financial crimes. It was a complete record of a family that had chosen power over everything else, over integrity, over law, over the son who had tried to hold them accountable. She found the last document in the final box just before 4 in the morning. It was not a financial statement. It was a letter, handwritten, 2 pages, dated 8 months before the accident. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Not Nathan's, his grandfather's, Robert Whitmore, who had died in 2011 at the age of 89 after building the family company from a regional construction operation into a diversified enterprise worth at its peak just under $2 billion. She read it slowly. Then she read it again. Then she said very quietly, "Rachel." Rachel looked up from the document she was reviewing. Emily held up the letter. "Nathan's grandfather wrote this," she said, 8 months before Nathan died, which means Nathan had it, which means someone gave it to him or he found it or... "What does it say?" Rachel asked. Emily looked down at the pages. Robert Whitmore's handwriting was old-fashioned formal, the penmanship of a man who had learned to write in an era when the physical act of writing was considered a reflection of character. She read to whoever holds this letter, "I am writing this in the knowledge that my health is failing and that what I know about the trust I established will die with me unless I commit it to paper now. The trust was not established as my son Richard believes it was established. Richard has spent 30 years operating under a misunderstanding that I was never brave enough to correct. The amendment of 2005 contains a protection clause that Richard does not know exists. I inserted it because I knew even then what my son was becoming. I loved him. I was afraid of him. I did not know how to stop what he was doing. I could only try to build something into the foundation of the family's legacy that would outlast his ability to corrupt it. The clause is specific. It is legally binding. It was witnessed by 2 independent attorneys, neither of whom was ever employed by the family. I am sorry I was not stronger. I am sorry it took me until the end of my life to do the one right thing I had the power to do." The room was completely silent. Rachel stood up from her chair. She walked to where Emily was standing and took the letter carefully by the edges. She read it. She read it a second time. "He didn't know," Rachel said. "Richard didn't know the clause existed." "His father hid it from him," Emily said, deliberately, because he knew what Richard was. "And Nathan found this letter," Rachel said. which means Nathan knew about the clause, which means he understood that if Richard ever moved against you, if anything happened to Nathan, and Richard tried to take everything, there was a mechanism inside the trust itself that could stop him. Emily pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment, because she understood now the full truth of what Nathan had done. He had not simply built a case against his father's financial crimes. He had found his grandfather's letter. He had understood the protection clause, and he had assembled everything, the financial evidence, the third-party statements, the letter into a record that could protect Emily if the worst happened. He had been preparing for his own death. He had known the risk he was taking, and he had taken it anyway, because he believed that the truth was worth more than his safety. She sat down. She pressed her hands flat on the table. She breathed. "Okay," she said. "What is the protection clause? What does it actually do?" Rachel set the letter down. "We don't have the full trust amendment yet. Nathan's letter referenced a storage unit. This is the storage unit. But the trust document itself would be held somewhere else, formally filed. There should be a record." She was already moving, already pulling her phone out, already shifting into the gear Emily recognized as Rachel, at her most effective, focused, fast processing three things at once. If Robert Whitmore had this clause witnessed by independent attorneys in 2005, there will be a filing record. It may have been suppressed, buried in the estate records somewhere that the Whitmore family's lawyers never thought to look because they didn't know it existed. But suppressed is not the same as destroyed. How long will it take to find it? I know someone at the Illinois Secretary of State's office who owes me a significant professional favor, Rachel said. I am going to call that favor in at 8 o'clock this morning. In the meantime, she looked at Emily directly. I need you to listen to me very carefully. The Whitmore family is going to escalate. Now that you have walked out of that settlement meeting and made it clear you are going to fight, they are going to move faster. They may try to move the court date. They may file additional motions. They may try other things. She paused. I need you to be somewhere safe, somewhere they cannot find you easily. And I need you to stay off your phone, your regular phone. Buy a prepaid. Use that for anything you communicate to me about this case. Emily looked at her. You think they're monitoring me? I think Richard Whitmore has had 9 years of practice making things disappear, Rachel said. I think he has people. I think he has resources we do not know about yet. And I think that what is in these boxes is the thing he has been most afraid of for the last 8 months. So yes, I think you need to be careful. Emily bought a prepaid phone at a drugstore on North Milwaukee at 8:15 in the morning. She was back at her cousin's apartment by 9. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee she could not taste and thought about Nathan and about Robert Whitmore writing a letter at the end of his life because he had not been brave enough earlier, and about Richard Whitmore standing in his study telling her this was not personal while his lawyers built the legal architecture to take everything. Her phone, the prepaid one, buzzed at 9:47. Rachel. I found a name, Rachel said. One of the independent attorneys who witnessed the 2005 amendment. His name is Harold Brennan. He is 81 years old, and he retired from practice in 2014. He lives in Evanston. I have his address. Is he willing to talk? I don't know yet. I haven't called him. I wanted to talk to you first because if we contact him and the Whitmore family finds out we contacted him, they will try to get to him first, Emily said. Yes. Then we go today. Harold Brennan lived in a 2-story house on a quiet street in Evanston that had the particular feeling of a place where someone had lived for a very long time and had stopped noticing it. He answered the door himself, which suggested he was not expecting them. He was a small man, slightly stooped, with the careful eyes of someone who had spent decades reading contracts for a living and had developed a permanent habit of looking for the thing that was not quite right. He looked at Emily, then at Rachel. I was wondering, he said, how long it would take someone to find me. He let them in. Haimada tea, which neither of them wanted, but both accepted because it was clearly the only way the conversation was going to proceed at his pace rather than theirs. He moved carefully around his kitchen without speaking, and Emily watched him and thought about what it must feel like to be 81 years old and to have carried a secret for 20 years and to know when 2 women show up at your door that the secret is finally arriving to be dealt with. He set the tea on this table and sat down across from them. Robert Whitmore came to me in March of 2005, he said without preamble. He had already drafted the language. He had it reviewed by another attorney, a woman in Springfield, no connection to the family. He came to me because he wanted someone in Chicago, someone with enough standing that the document would survive scrutiny, someone who had no relationship with Richard or with the family's regular counsel. He wrapped both hands around his mug. He told me what his son had been doing. Not all of it. Enough. He told me he had created the original trust in 1987 with the intention that the Whitmore legacy would pass to people of integrity regardless of bloodline. And he told me that he had come to believe his son was not that person. But he could not bring himself to remove Richard entirely. Family, he said. Whatever Richard had become, he was still his son. So instead, he inserted the clause. "What does the clause say?" Rachel asked. "It says, Harold Brennan told them, with the deliberate precision of a man reciting something he had memorized decades ago and never forgotten, that in the event the acting trustee of the Whitmore Family Trust is found to have committed financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, or intentional concealment of information from rightful beneficiaries, control of the trust and all associated assets shall transfer immediately to the surviving spouse of the most recent direct heir. If no surviving spouse exists, to the charitable foundation designated by that heir. If no such foundation exists, to the state of Illinois for distribution to public education." He looked at Emily. "You are Nathan Whitmore's surviving spouse." The silence lasted a long time. "Is the clause enforceable?" Rachel asked. "It was properly witnessed, properly filed with the original trust documents at the time of the 2005 amendment, and registered with a third-party escrow attorney," Harold said. "The Whitmore family's lawyers have almost certainly never found it because they never looked for it. They had no reason to look for it. Richard believed he controlled the trust absolutely. Robert made sure that belief was never challenged during his lifetime. He was protecting himself as much as he was protecting the future. He was a complicated man." Harold looked at Emily steadily. "But in the end, he did the right thing. It just took him 20 years. Rachel leaned forward. "Mr. Brennan, would you be willing to testify to what you just told us in court on the record?" Harold Brennan looked at his tea for a long moment. Then he looked up. "I am 81 years old," he said. "I have approximately 3 things left on the list of things I would like to accomplish before I die. One of them is making sure that document does what Robert intended it to do." He set down his mug. "Yes, I will testify." The Whitmore family's legal team moved the very next morning. Emily learned about it from Rachel at 7:15, before she had finished her first cup of coffee. "They filed an emergency motion," Rachel said. "They are requesting an accelerated court date. They are claiming that you have been making unauthorized contact with Whitmore Enterprises employees and that this constitutes interference with estate proceedings." "I have not contacted a single Whitmore Enterprises employee," Emily said. "I know you haven't," Rachel said. "That is not the point. The point is that they are moving the timeline. They want this in front of a judge before we are ready, before we can file our response." Emily set down her coffee. "How long do we have? The motion requests a hearing in 14 days. Can they get that? With the right judge and the right connections?" "Yes." Emily was quiet for a moment. "Do they know about Harold Brennan?" "I don't think so. Not yet. But Emily, we cannot wait. If they find out we have found a witness who can speak to the 2005 amendment, they will do everything in their power to discredit him or intimidate him before we can get him on record." Rachel's voice was controlled and urgent at the same time. "I need you to trust me completely for the next 14 days. I need you to do exactly what I tell you when I tell you without explaining it to anyone else. Can you do that?" "Yes," Emily said. "Good, because here is what we are going to do." What Rachel did in the following 11 days was nothing short of extraordinary. She filed a counter-motion challenging the emergency request on procedural grounds. She contacted Carol Ashworth, the former Whitmore finance director, and within 48 hours had secured a sworn written statement detailing what Ashworth had observed during her time at the company, specific transactions, specific dates, specific amounts, specific names. She worked with a forensic accountant named David Park, who owed her a favor from a case 3 years earlier to prepare a financial analysis of the shell company payments that could be presented to a court in terms that required no specialized knowledge to understand. She arranged for Harold Brennan's testimony to be preserved in a notarized deposition, so that if anything happened to him before he could appear in court, his account would be on record. And she found the 2005 amendment. It was exactly where Harold Brennan told them it would be filed, with the original trust documents registered with a third-party escrow attorney, preserved in a way that the Whitmore family's own lawyers had never found, because they had never looked. The escrow attorney was a woman named Margaret Chu, who had kept the document in her private files for 20 years, as she had been instructed, waiting for the day someone asked for it. When Rachel called her, Margaret Chu said, "I have been waiting for this call for a long time." She provided the document the same day. Emily held the amendment in her hands the evening Rachel brought it to the apartment. She sat at the kitchen table and read the protection clause in its full legal language, dense and precise and absolutely clear. She read the part that said the surviving spouse of the most recent direct heir. She read the part that said, in the event the acting trustee has committed financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, or intentional concealment. She thought about Robert Whitmore writing a letter at the end of his life. "I am sorry I was not stronger." She thought about Nathan finding that letter, building the case, carrying the weight of it alone. She thought about the morning he left. Trust Rachel, only Rachel. He had known exactly what he was doing. He had known exactly what he was putting in motion. He had known that if the worst happened, Emily would find the key, find the storage unit, find the letter, find Rachel, and Rachel would find Harold Brennan, and Harold Brennan would lead them to Margaret Chu, and Margaret Chu would produce the document, and the document would do what Robert Whitmore had intended it to do 20 years earlier. He had trusted her to follow the chain he had built. She had followed it. Now they had everything. Except that 3 days before the scheduled hearing, something happened that changed the shape of everything. Emily's cousin called her in the early afternoon, her voice tight with something between anger and fear. "There is a man outside," her cousin said. "He has been sitting in a car across the street for 2 hours. I have seen him before. He was here yesterday morning." Emily felt the cold move through her. "Don't go outside," she said immediately. "Don't approach him. Call me back if he moves." She called Rachel. "They're watching the apartment," Emily said. Rachel did not pause. "Pack what you need. Tonight. I have a place, a friend's house in Oak Park. They won't know about it. We move tonight." "Rachel, if they're watching the apartment, they may already know about Harold Brennan." A silence. "I called Harold this morning," Rachel said. "He was fine. He sounded—" She stopped. "I'll call him again right now." The pause that followed was 63 seconds. Emily counted. Rachel came back on the line. "No answer," she said. The cold moved through Emily again, deeper this time. "Go to him," Emily said. "I'm already in my car," Rachel said. Harold Brennan was fine. He had been in his backyard and had not heard the phone. He was annoyed at the fuss and made Rachel a cup of tea she did not want, and told her that he had not survived 81 years by being easily intimidated, and that if Richard Whitmore wanted to send someone to sit in a car on his street, Richard Whitmore was welcome to waste his time. Emily felt the relief move through her when Rachel called back, but the relief did not last long. Because that evening the Whitmore family's lawyers filed a second motion. This one was not procedural. This one was a direct attack. The motion alleged that Emily Carter, in the weeks following Nathan Whitmore's death, had engaged in a pattern of behavior designed to fraudulently construct a legal challenge to the Whitmore family trust. It alleged that she had solicited false testimony. It alleged that she had accessed private company documents through illegal means. It attached as an exhibit a photograph of Emily outside the storage facility on West Fullerton. They had known about the storage unit, not what was inside it, but they had known she was there. Emily stared at the photograph on Rachel's laptop screen. "They've been following me longer than we thought," she said. "Yes," Rachel said. "They know we have something. They don't know exactly what, but they know we have something." "Yes." Emily looked at the screen for a long moment. Then she said, "Good." Rachel looked at her. "If they know we have something," Emily said, "then they are afraid, and people who are afraid make mistakes." She met Rachel's eyes. "We go to that hearing in 3 days with everything we have. We do not hold anything back. We put it all in front of the judge at once, the amendment, the financial evidence, Carol Ashworth's statement, Harold Brennan's testimony, all of it, in one hearing, before they have time to respond." "That is a significant risk," Rachel said. "If the judge doesn't—" "I know it's a risk," Emily said. "But Rachel, think about what they just did. They attached a photograph of me outside a storage facility to a legal motion. They are not trying to win on the merits. They are trying to bury me in paper until I run out of energy and money. and I am not going to run out of either. So we stop playing their game." She leaned forward. "We walk into that courtroom in 3 days, and we end this." Rachel looked at her for a long moment. Then she sat back. "Okay," she said. "Then we have 3 days to make sure everything is perfect." They worked for 3 days straight. Rachel prepared the legal arguments with the precision of someone who understood that this hearing was not just about a trust document. It was about establishing in front of a judge the full picture of what the Whitmore family had done. She organized the financial evidence in a sequence that told a story even someone with no legal background could follow. She coordinated with David Park, the forensic accountant, to prepare a summary document that condensed 9 years of shell company transactions into 4 clear pages. She arranged for Harold Brennan to appear in person, having concluded that his physical presence, an 81-year-old man who had waited 20 years to do the right thing, was worth more than a deposition. Emily helped with everything she could and spent the hours she could not help in a stillness that she had learned from Nathan. The stillness of someone who has decided and does not need to keep deciding. The stillness of someone who knows that the work is done and what remains is only the doing of it. On the night before the hearing, Rachel sat across from her at the table in the Oak Park house and looked at her with the directness that had always been Rachel's most reliable quality. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Rachel said, "I need you to know that what Nathan built, what he left for you, it is the most complete, most carefully constructed piece of evidentiary preparation I have ever seen in 20 years of legal practice. He loved you, and he trusted you completely. Whatever happens tomorrow, that is true." Emily looked at her. "It is going to work," Emily said, not as a question, not as a wish, as the thing. Nathan had known when he put the key in that envelope and wrote that note and trusted her to follow the chain. "Yes," Rachel said quietly, "it is." The morning of the hearing, Emily Carter put on the black dress she had worn to Nathan's funeral. She put on the small gold earrings he had given her on their 5th anniversary. She looked at herself once, then she walked out the door. She was not walking in as a widow. She was walking in as the person Nathan had trusted most, and she was carrying everything he had built. The courtroom was already full when Emily walked in. She had expected that. The Whitmore name in a headline drew people the way a storm drew attention, not because anyone was certain what would happen, but because everyone understood the scale of what could. Reporters sat in the gallery rows with notepads open. Whitmore Enterprises board members occupied a full section near the back. Gerald Fitch and his team of 4 attorneys arranged themselves at the opposing table with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this many times and expected to do it many times more. Richard Whitmore sat at the center of that table. He was wearing a dark gray suit and the expression of a man who had already decided the outcome. He looked at Emily when she walked in. He held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked away, which told her everything she needed to know about how seriously he was taking today's proceeding. Not seriously enough. Rachel was already at their table. She did not look up when Emily sat down. She was reviewing something in a folder, her pen moving in small, deliberate notations in the margin. Her face composed in the particular stillness that Emily had come to recognize as Rachel at her most dangerous. Harold Brennan sat in the front row of the gallery directly behind their table. He was wearing a blue suit that looked like it had been pressed for an occasion 20 years ago and preserved with great care ever since. He caught Emily's eye and gave her a single small nod. She nodded back. "How are you?" Rachel asked without looking up from the folder. "Ready," Emily said. Rachel looked up then. She studied Emily's face for a moment. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her. She returned to the folder. Gerald Fitch appeared at their table. He did this smoothly, casually, the way powerful men approach opposing counsel when they want to project confidence without crossing into aggression. He stood just at the edge of the table's boundary, with his hands in his pockets and his expression organized into something that was almost collegial. "Counselor," he said to Rachel, "I want to give you one final opportunity before we begin. My clients are prepared to significantly improve the settlement terms. Mrs. Whitmore." He glanced at Emily in a way that managed to be both dismissive and superficially respectful, would receive a lump sum payment and the contents of the personal property held in the marital residence. No litigation costs, no public proceeding, a clean resolution. Rachel did not look up from the folder. "We'll see you in front of the Judge Gerald." Fitch held his position for one more moment. Then he walked back to his table. Emily watched him go. She watched Richard Whitmore lean toward Fitch as he sat down and say something quietly, and she watched Fitch respond with a slight shake of his head, and she watched Richard's jaw tighten by the fraction of an inch that she had learned to read as his version of losing composure. They were not as confident as they were pretending to be. The judge entered at 9:14. His name was Honorable Charles Drummond, 67 years old, 31 years on the bench. He had the face of a man who had heard every variety of human dishonesty and had arrived at a place of professional equanimity about it that was distinguishable from indifference only by the quality of his attention. His attention was absolute. He settled into his seat, surveyed the courtroom without apparent interest in anything he found there, and opened the file. "This is a contested estate proceeding in the matter of the Whitmore Family Trust," he said. "We have a petition from the Whitmore family for consolidated trustee authority and a counter-petition challenging the validity of that claim on the basis of trust amendment documents and alleged fiduciary misconduct. Is that a fair characterization of where we are?" "Yes, Your Honor," Rachel said. "Yes, Your Honor," Fitch said. "Good." Drummond looked at the file for another moment. Then he looked up. "Mr. Fitch, your clients filed the original petition, so you'll proceed first. You have the floor." What followed was 40 minutes of Gerald Fitch at his most polished. He presented the Whitmore family's case with the fluency of a man who had been doing this for 22 years and understood that a courtroom was at its core a theater, and that the audience was a single judge who needed to be brought along a narrative at precisely the right pace. He spoke about the family trust established in 1987, its terms and its history, and its clear designation of Richard Whitmore as the acting trustee with full authority over its assets. He spoke about Nathan's personal will and the amendments that Emily had claimed gave her expanded rights, and he characterized those amendments as documents that had been executed under circumstances that raised serious questions about Nathan's state of mind in his final months. He used the phrase undue influence 3 times. He presented 2 witnesses, a Whitmore Enterprises board member and a family friend who testified carefully and vaguely that Nathan had seemed troubled in the period before his death, that he had said things that suggested he was under pressure from his wife, that his decisions in that period had seemed out of character. It was effective. Emily could feel it being effective. She could feel the way the narrative settled over the room like weather, the way Drummond's attention moved between Fitch and the documents he was presenting with the neutral receptivity of someone genuinely considering what they were being told. She kept her hands flat on the table. She breathed the way Nathan had taught her to breathe. Then it was Rachel's turn. Rachel stood up. She did not use notes. "Your Honor," she said. "The Whitmore family's petition rests on the premise that the trust established in 1987 gives Richard Whitmore absolute authority over the estate. I am going to demonstrate that this premise is false, not arguable, not a matter of competing interpretations. False. I am going to do that in 3 steps. First, I am going to introduce a trust amendment executed in 2005 that contains a specific protection clause directly governing this situation. Second, I am going to present evidence that Richard Whitmore has committed the precise categories of misconduct that activate that clause. Third, I am going to call a witness who will establish the validity and provenance of that amendment beyond any reasonable challenge." She paused. "I would like to begin with the amendment." She presented the document. She walked Drummond through it methodically, the date, the witnessing attorneys, the registration with the independent escrow agent, the specific language of the protection clause. She had prepared a clean summary that extracted the key passage and formatted it for easy reading, and she handed this to the judge along with the full document, and she waited while he read both. Gerald Fitch was on his feet before Drummond had finished reading. "Your Honor, we have never seen this document. We have had no opportunity to review it. The authenticity of this alleged amendment has not been established." "Sit down, Mr. Fitch," Drummond said without looking up. Fitch sat down. Drummond read for another 3 minutes. The courtroom was completely silent. Emily watched the judge's face and tried to read it and could not. He was too practiced. He had the face of someone who had learned to withhold a reaction as a professional discipline. Finally, he set the document down. He looked at Rachel. "Counselor, this amendment you are representing that it was legitimately executed and filed at the time of its date." "Yes, Your Honor." The escrow attorney who holds the original registration is available to testify. We have her notarized certification of the filing date and the witnessing process." Drummond looked at Fitch. "Did your team have access to the full trust filing history, including third-party escrow registrations, when you prepared the original petition?" Fitch's pause lasted 1 second too long. "We reviewed the primary trust documents, Your Honor. A third-party escrow registration of this nature would not have appeared in a standard document search." "I see," Drummond said. He made a note. That note, the precise movement of the judge's pen, the particular angle of his attention as he wrote, was the first moment Emily understood that something was shifting in the room. She felt it before she could name it. A change in pressure. The way a room feels different before a storm actually arrives. Richard Whitmore felt it too. She could see it in the way he leaned toward Fitch and said something urgent and quiet, and she could see it in the way Fitch listened and responded with a slight movement of his hand that was unmistakably the gesture of a lawyer telling his client to stop talking. Rachel called Harold Brennan. He walked to the stand with the deliberate pace of a man who had no need to hurry, settled himself carefully, and stated his name and professional background for the record. Then Rachel led him through it, the meeting with Robert Whitmore in March 2005, the specific instructions he had been given, the witnessing of the amendment, alongside a colleague from Springfield, the registration process, the conversation in which Robert Whitmore had explained, in terms that Harold now repeated with precise and measured clarity, exactly why the protection clause existed and exactly what it was designed to prevent. When Harold said on the record that Robert Whitmore had told him his son Richard was becoming someone he could no longer trust with the family's legacy, the sound that moved through the courtroom was not quite audible. It was the sound of people very carefully not reacting. Richard Whitmore reacted. He was not loud. He was not dramatic. He turned to Fitch and said something in a voice too low to hear, and his face had the quality of a man experiencing something he had never experienced before. The particular shock of someone who has operated for decades on the assumption that they have accounted for every variable, encountering the one variable they missed: his own father. Fitch cross-examined Harold for 22 minutes. He challenged Harold's recollection. He challenged the specificity of his memory, given the 20 years that had elapsed. He suggested that Robert Whitmore had been in failing health in 2005 and that his judgment might have been compromised. Harold answered every question with the precise, patient clarity of someone who had been a lawyer for 40 years and understood exactly what cross-examination was trying to do, and had no intention of letting it succeed. At one point, Fitch said, "Mr. Brennan, isn't it possible that your recollection of the conversation with Robert Whitmore has been shaped over 20 years by your own interpretation of events, rather than by what actually occurred?" Harold looked at him. "Mr. Fitch," he said, "I am a retired attorney, not a retired human being. When a client comes to me at the end of his life and tells me he is afraid of his own son, that is not the kind of conversation a person forgets." The courtroom was quiet. Drummond made another note. Rachel stood back up. She presented the financial evidence in the sequence she and David Park had constructed over those 3 days, clean, logical, impossible to misunderstand. Shell companies with no employees, no addresses, no legitimate business activity, receiving $40 to $60 million in payments from Whitmore Enterprises over 9 years. Internal communications from Nathan's files showing the discovery process. Carol Ashworth's sworn statement, which Rachel read into the record in full, describing specific transactions she had observed and questioned during her time as finance director, and the pressure she had received to stop questioning them. She presented the letter from Robert Whitmore. When she read the passage, I inserted it because I knew even then what my son was becoming. I loved him. I was afraid of him. The silence in the courtroom was the deepest it had been. Victoria Whitmore pressed a tissue to her eyes. Richard Whitmore stared straight ahead at a point approximately 6 feet in front of him and did not move. Drummond read the letter twice. He read it the way he had read everything, with the total unhurried attention of someone who understood that the document in his hands was not a legal exhibit, but a human record. The words of an old man who had waited too long and tried at the last possible moment to do the right thing. He set it down. He looked at Richard Whitmore, and his expression changed. Not dramatically, not in the way that happens in movies where a judge's face transforms into a signal of the verdict about to come. It changed the way weather changes, an almost imperceptible shift in the quality of the light, a cooling, a drawing inward. The professional neutrality was still there, But underneath it something had settled. Fitch requested a recess. Drummond granted 15 minutes. In the corridor, Richard Whitmore cornered Emily. "I did it smoothly. There was no other word for it. Stepping into her path with the physical confidence of a man who had spent 64 years occupying space as though it belonged to him by right. His lawyers were behind him. Rachel was 10 feet away, already moving toward them. "You think you've won something," he said. His voice was low, almost conversational. "You haven't won anything. You've opened a box you do not understand. Do you know what happens to people who make enemies of this family?" Emily looked at him. She was not afraid. She had moved through the fear somewhere in the past 3 weeks, through it, and out the other side into something harder and quieter and more durable. She was not certain what to call the thing she felt looking at Richard Whitmore in that corridor. It was not hatred. It was not satisfaction. It was something close to clarity. The clarity of seeing a person completely without any remaining illusion about what they were. "I know exactly what happens," she said. "It happened to Nathan." Richard's face shifted. Rachel was at Emily's shoulder. "Mr. Whitmore," Rachel said with the particular calm of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment, "I would strongly encourage you to step back. Anything you say to my client outside that courtroom is a conversation I am going to remember very precisely." Richard looked at Rachel, then back at Emily. He stepped back. He walked away. Emily turned to Rachel. "He just threatened me in front of witnesses," she said quietly. "Yes," Rachel said. "He did." They returned to the courtroom. Drummond came back to the bench 4 minutes after the scheduled end of the recess. He settled his papers. He looked at both tables. "I have reviewed the amendment document, the witness testimony, and the financial evidence submitted by the respondent," he said. "I want to address the petitioner's counsel directly." He turned to Fitch. "Mr. Fitch, the protection clause in the 2005 amendment is explicit about the conditions under which trustee authority is suspended. The respondent has presented a prima facie case that those conditions have been met. This is not a matter I am prepared to resolve in a summary proceeding. However, I am prepared to issue an interim order." He paused. "Effective immediately, Richard Whitmore's authority as acting trustee of the Whitmore Family Trust is suspended pending a full evidentiary hearing. All trust assets are frozen. All pending transfers are halted. The respondent's accounts, which were frozen pursuant to the petitioner's earlier motion, are to be immediately unfrozen." The sound that moved through the courtroom this time was audible. Gerald Fitch was on his feet. "Your Honor, with respect, this is an extraordinary measure." "It is a proportionate measure, Mr. Fitch, given the nature of the evidence before me." Drummond's voice did not change. "Your client will have full opportunity to contest the respondent's claims at the evidentiary hearing. In the meantime, I am also referring the financial evidence submitted today to the United States Attorney's Office for review." He looked directly at Richard Whitmore. "This court has observed the pattern of conduct documented in these exhibits. That conduct, if substantiated, is not a civil matter. It is a criminal one." Richard Whitmore's face was the face of a man standing on ground that had just moved. Victoria Whitmore was no longer pressing the tissue to her eyes. She was staring at her husband with an expression that Emily had never seen on her face before. Something between horror and recognition, as though she was seeing something she had always half known and had never allowed herself to look at directly. Fitch was speaking rapidly to the judge, filing objections, requesting stays, doing all the things excellent lawyers do when they understand that the proceeding has moved in a direction they cannot immediately reverse. Drummond listened, acknowledged, denied the stay request, and adjourned. The gavel came down. Emily sat completely still for a moment. Rachel put a hand on her arm. "Emily," she turned. Rachel's face held something Emily had not seen there before. Not triumph, Rachel was too disciplined for triumph. Something quieter, something that looked underneath the professional composure like relief. "He referred it to the U.S. Attorney," Emily said. "Yes. That means... It means the federal investigation Nathan was trying to trigger," Rachel said quietly, "is now triggered." Emily looked at the front of the courtroom where Drummond had already left the bench, where Fitch was still speaking rapidly to his associates, where Richard Whitmore sat motionless at the table. She thought about Nathan building those boxes, filing those documents, carrying the weight of what he had found alone through the last months of his life. He had wanted the truth to come out. He had not lived to see it, but it was coming out now. She stood up. She felt it in her legs, the exhaustion of 3 weeks of fear and work and not sleeping enough, all of it arriving at once, now that the adrenaline of the morning had somewhere to go. She felt it in her chest, something large and complicated moving through her, not quite grief and not quite relief and not quite anything she had a precise name for. Harold Brennan was waiting for her outside the bar. He extended his hand. She shook it. "Robert would be glad," he said simply. She nodded. She did not trust herself to speak. Outside the courtroom in the corridor, reporters materialized with the speed of people who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Questions came in overlapping waves. Rachel handled them with the practiced conciseness of someone who knew that a corridor outside a courtroom was not the place for a full statement, and that the most useful thing she could say was the minimum that prevented anyone from filling the space with speculation. Emily said nothing to the reporters. She walked through them, not away from them, through steadily without stopping or speeding up the way Nathan had told her to move through difficult rooms when she needed to reach the other side. She got outside. She stood on the courthouse steps in the October air. She took out the prepaid phone and dialed the only number in it. Rachel answered from 10 feet behind her, still holding her own phone to her ear, having extracted herself from the reporters. "I know you're right behind me," Emily said. "I know you know," Rachel said. They both stood there for a moment. "What happens now?" Emily asked. "Now," Rachel said, "the federal investigators start asking questions that Richard Whitmore has been running from for 9 years. And we prepare for the full evidentiary hearing where we present everything, all of it, and the protection clause is formally activated." She paused. "It will take time. It will not be clean. The Whitmore lawyers will file every motion available to them. Richard will claim the financial evidence was obtained improperly. He will challenge Harold's testimony. He will challenge the amendment itself, even though we have already established its validity, because challenging things is all he has left." "But we have the amendment," Emily said. "We have the amendment," Rachel confirmed. "And we have Nathan's evidence. And we have Harold. And we have Carol Ashworth. And we have the fact that Drummond has already referred this to the U.S. Attorney, which means federal investigators are now building their own case independent of ours, which means the Whitmore family's ability to suppress or discredit what Nathan found is significantly diminished." She paused again. "Emily, we are not at the end, but we are past the moment where the outcome was uncertain." Emily looked out at the street. Traffic moved past with its ordinary indifference. The city continued. People who had no idea who the Whitmores were walked by with coffee cups and phones and the private preoccupations of ordinary Thursday lives. She thought about Nathan. She thought about him specifically, not as an abstraction, not as the source of the evidence or the architect of the plan, but as the person she had loved. The way he laughed when something surprised him, the way he moved through a room, the way he looked at her sometimes as though she was the clearest thing in a complicated world. She was going to win this. She was going to win it for him. But winning it was not going to give her back the person she missed. That was the thing about justice. She understood now that nobody warned you about. It was real. It mattered. It was worth every day of the last 3 weeks and everything that was still to come. And it was not the same as the thing you had lost. "Rachel," she said. "Yes. Thank you." A pause. Short. The length of a breath. "He trusted you," Rachel said. "I just followed the evidence." Inside the courthouse, Gerald Fitch was on his phone with Richard Whitmore's personal attorney mapping the appeal strategy. Richard Whitmore sat at the empty table alone for the first time since the proceeding began. Victoria had moved to a seat against the wall as far from him as the room allowed, and she was staring at the floor with the particular stillness of a woman who had just understood something she could not ununderstand. The photograph of Emily outside the storage facility on West Fullerton, which the Whitmore family had submitted as evidence of misconduct, now sat in the court record as documentation that they had been surveilling a grieving widow. The sealed envelope containing the 2005 amendment, which the Whitmore family had not known existed, now sat in the court record as the document that changed everything. And in a federal building 4 miles away, a duty officer was reading the referral from Judge Drummond's courtroom and picking up the phone to call the Financial Crimes Division. Nathan Whitmore had tried to make this call himself. The call was finally being made. Emily put the prepaid phone in her pocket. She turned and walked back through the courthouse doors because there were documents to sign and procedures to complete, and Rachel needed her at the table for the next hour at least. She was not done. She was nowhere near done. but for the first time since a voice she did not recognize had called her at 2 in the morning and told her the plane had gone down, she understood that the thing Nathan had built was going to hold, that the truth he had worked so hard to preserve was going to survive, and that the woman he had trusted most was going to see it through. The federal investigators arrived at Whitmore Enterprises on a Tuesday morning, 6 days after Judge Drummond's interim order. Emily was not there to see it. She learned about it the way most of the city learned about it from Rachel, who called at 7:43 in the morning with a voice that was careful and controlled, and underneath the control was something that sounded almost like awe. They brought 12 agents, Rachel said. Financial Crimes and Wire Fraud Division. They executed a search warrant on the corporate headquarters and 3 satellite offices simultaneously. They are pulling servers, physical files, everything. Emily sat down on the edge of the bed in the Oak Park house. "How do you know?" she asked. "Carol Ashworth called me 20 minutes ago. She still has contacts inside the company. She said the executive floor is completely locked down. Richard's personal assistant was escorted out of the building by 2 agents and told to make herself available for interview." Rachel paused. "Emily, this is not a preliminary inquiry. This is a full criminal investigation. They went in with a warrant. That means a federal judge reviewed the evidence from Drummond's referral and found sufficient probable cause. Nathan's documentation, the shell companies, the transaction records, all of it. It is what drove this warrant." Emily pressed her hand flat against her sternum. She was thinking about Nathan sitting at that kitchen table. The low voice, the careful eyes. "I found something inside the company financials." He had known what it meant when he found it. He had known what it would cost him to pursue it. And he had pursued it anyway alone, building the case document by document across months of quiet, terrified work, because he believed that some things were more important than his own safety. She had believed for 11 days after his death that he had died for nothing. She understood now that he had died for exactly this. "What happens to the evidentiary hearing?" she asked. "It proceeds," Rachel said. "The federal investigation runs parallel. Our hearing establishes the civil claim your rights under the Protection Clause, the transfer of trust authority. The federal case establishes the criminal liability. They are separate proceedings. But the evidence overlaps almost entirely, which means the federal investigators in our case are effectively reinforcing each other." "And Richard?" A pause. "Richard's personal attorney filed a statement this morning saying his client intends to cooperate fully with investigators," Rachel said, "which is what you say when you are trying to prevent an arrest, while your legal team determines how much the government actually has." "How much do they have?" "Based on what Nathan put in those boxes," Rachel said. "Enough." The evidentiary hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In those 3 weeks, the Whitmore family's legal strategy underwent a visible transformation that Emily watched from the outside with the detached attention of someone who had been the target of that strategy long enough to understand its mechanics. In the first week, Gerald Fitch filed 4 separate motions challenging the admissibility of Nathan's financial documentation on the grounds that it had been obtained from a private storage facility without the knowledge of the estate. Rachel defeated all 4 motions with arguments that took her 2 days to prepare and Drummond approximately 40 minutes to review before denying them. Nathan had registered the storage unit independently under the name of his grandfather's attorney as a private individual, not as an officer of Whitmore Enterprises. The documents inside it were his personal property. Emily, as his surviving spouse, had legal access to his personal property. There was no improper acquisition. The motions were denied. In the second week, Fitch attempted a different approach. He filed a motion claiming that the 2005 amendment was invalid on the grounds that Robert Whitmore had demonstrated signs of cognitive decline in the period before his death, citing medical records from 2009, 4 years after the amendment was executed, as evidence of a pattern of deterioration that he claimed was already present in 2005. Rachel called Margaret Chu to submit an additional affidavit describing her interactions with Robert Whitmore at the time of the filing, in which she characterized him as precise, deliberate, and entirely coherent. She supplemented this with a statement from Harold Brennan's Springfield colleague, the second witnessing attorney who confirmed the same assessment. The motion was denied. In the third week, something changed. Emily felt it before she had evidence for it, a shift in the texture of the pressure being applied, a change in the angle of the attack. Fitch had stopped filing broad motions and started filing narrow ones, targeted specific, aimed not at overturning the amendment, but at limiting its application. His new argument was technical. Even if the protection clause existed, and even if the conditions for its activation had been met, the mechanics of the transfer required a formal trustee appointment process that had not yet occurred, and until that process was complete, the frozen assets could not be transferred to Emily. It was a delay tactic. Both Rachel and Emily knew it was a delay tactic, but it was a sophisticated one, and it required Rachel to spend the better part of 4 days constructing a legal response that addressed not just the argument itself, but every variation of the argument that Fitch might deploy in response to her response. On the fourth night of those 4 days, Emily brought Rachel coffee at 11:30 in the evening and sat across from her at the table that had become the command center of their case. "You're exhausted," Emily said. "I'm fine," Rachel said without looking up. "You have been fine for 3 weeks. At some point, fine stops being a description and becomes a reflex." Rachel looked up then. She had circles under her eyes that Emily had not noticed appearing the way you don't notice a tide coming in until it's already around your feet. "I keep thinking," Rachel said, setting down her pen, about what he built. "Nathan, I keep thinking about the fact that he put together a case that has now driven a federal search warrant and withstood 7 legal challenges and is 3 weeks from a hearing that is almost certainly going to go in your favor. He did that alone, while running a company, while managing his relationship with his father, while managing his relationship with you without being able to tell you what was happening." She shook her head. "He was remarkable." Emily was quiet for a moment. "He was scared," she said. "He was scared every day. That's what people don't understand about remarkable people. They're not remarkable because they're not afraid. They're remarkable because they do the thing anyway." Rachel looked at her. "You know that describes you too," she said. Emily picked up her coffee. "Get some sleep," she said. 3 weeks. The twist arrived on a Thursday afternoon, 11 days before the hearing, in the form of a phone call that Rachel took privately, and then came to find Emily in the kitchen of the Oak Park house with an expression that was not quite readable. "Sit down," Rachel said. Emily sat. "I just got off the phone with an attorney representing Victoria Whitmore." Emily went very still. "Victoria has retained separate counsel," Rachel said. "Independent of Gerald Fitch. Independent of Richard's legal team. She is not filing any motions. She is not challenging anything." Rachel sat down across from her. "She wants to meet with you." The silence lasted a full 10 seconds. "Why?" Emily asked. Her attorney would not say specifically, but the language she used, Rachel set her notepad on the table, was that Victoria has information that she believes is material to the proceedings and that she is prepared to share it with you directly, not with the court, not with the federal investigators, with you, first. Emily looked at the notepad. "Is this a strategy?" she asked. "Is Fitch behind this?" "Victoria has formally separated her legal representation from Richard's. That is a matter of record as of this morning." Rachel looked at her steadily. "Emily, when a wife separates her legal representation from her husband's in the middle of a federal fraud investigation, there is generally one reason." "She's cooperating," Emily said, "or preparing to." Emily thought about Victoria Whitmore in the courtroom 3 weeks ago, the tissue pressed to her eyes that was and wasn't genuine grief. The moment after Drummond read Robert Whitmore's letter aloud, when Victoria had stopped pressing the tissue to her eyes and started staring at her husband with the expression of a woman seeing something she could no longer pretend not to see. "When does she want to meet?" Emily asked. "Tomorrow," Rachel said. "Neutral location. Her attorney's office in Lincoln Park. Her attorney will be present. I will be present. No recording." Emily was quiet for a moment. "She knows something about the plane," Emily said. It was not a question. Rachel held her gaze. "I think that is possible," Rachel said carefully. "Then we go tomorrow." Victoria Whitmore arrived at her attorney's office before Emily and Rachel. She was sitting in a chair at the far end of a conference table when they were shown in, and the first thing Emily noticed was that she looked different. The performance was gone. The composed grief, the careful presentation, the posture of a woman playing a role she had been playing for so long that she had stopped distinguishing it from herself. It was simply absent. What remained was a woman in her 60s who looked like she had not slept properly in weeks and had recently made a decision that had cost her something significant. She looked at Emily when Emily sat down. "I owe you an apology," Victoria said. Her voice was different, too lower stripped of the social register it usually occupied. "More than an apology, I know that, but I'm going to start there because I don't know how else to start." Emily said nothing. "I knew Richard was moving money," Victoria said. "I didn't know the full scope. I told myself I didn't know the full scope because it was easier than knowing. But I knew enough. I knew for years." She folded her hands on the table. "I told myself it was a family matter. I told myself it wouldn't affect anyone outside the family. I told myself—" She stopped. "I told myself a lot of things that I understood on some level were not true." "Mrs. Whitmore," Rachel said quietly, "why are you telling us this now?" Victoria looked at her, then back at Emily. "Because of Nathan," she said. The room was completely still. "Nathan came to me," Victoria said. 4 months before he died. He told me what he had found. He told me what he was planning to do. He asked me to talk to Richard, to convince Richard to go to the board voluntarily, to try to contain the damage before it became— She gestured at the space around them, at the implication of the proceedings, the investigation, everything that had become this. She pressed her lips together. "I told him I would. I went to Richard, and Richard told me to stay out of it. He told me Nathan was being naive. He said he would handle it." She stopped again. Emily felt something moving through her chest, something cold and slow. "Did you know," she said very carefully, "that Nathan's plane was going to go down?" The question sat in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Victoria Whitmore closed her eyes. "No," she said. "I did not know that. I want you to believe that because it is true, and because the alternative—" Her voice broke for the first time in a way that did not look performed. "The alternative is something I have been living with for 3 months, and I cannot—" She stopped. She composed herself. "I did not know about the plane. I don't know with certainty that Richard did. I have no direct evidence. But I know that Richard made a phone call the night before Nathan left, and I know that after that call, he was calm in a way he had not been for weeks, and I know that when we got the news about the crash, he did not cry." The silence that followed was the longest of the meeting. Emily looked at the table. She thought about Nathan's face on the morning he left, the careful voice, the way he held her hand for a moment longer than usual before he picked up his bag. She thought about the phone call Richard had made the night before. She thought about the calm. "Mrs. Whitmore," Rachel said, and her voice was entirely steady, the voice of someone who had decided to do what needed to be done, regardless of what it felt like. "I need to ask you directly. Are you prepared to share what you just told us with federal investigators?" Victoria looked at Rachel. "My attorney has already made contact with the U.S. Attorney's Office," she said. "That is why I wanted to speak to Emily first. I needed her to know—" She looked at Emily. "I needed you to know that I am sorry for what I did and for what I didn't do, for what Richard did, for the fact that my son tried to do the right thing and we—" Her voice broke again. "And we were the people he needed protection from." Emily looked at her for a long time. She thought about what Rachel had said weeks ago at the beginning of all this. This is not just a civil case anymore. She thought about Nathan choosing to go to New York instead of letting it go, about Robert Whitmore writing a letter at the end of his life, about Harold Brennan keeping a secret for 20 years because a dying man had asked him to, about all the people who had at great cost to themselves chosen the truth over the easier thing. "I can't forgive you," Emily said. "Not today, maybe not for a long time, but I want you to tell them everything, every phone call, every conversation, everything Richard said to you about Nathan's discovery, and everything he did in the weeks before that plane went down. All of it." She held Victoria's gaze. "Not for me, for Nathan. Because he tried to give you the chance to do this on your own terms, and you didn't take it, and now the only thing left is to tell the truth." Victoria nodded. Once, slowly, the nod of a woman who had arrived somewhere she could not leave. The meeting lasted another 40 minutes. Victoria's attorney walked Rachel through the specific scope of what Victoria was prepared to disclose. It was significant. It included not just her knowledge of the financial irregularities, but a specific conversation with Richard 10 days before the accident, in which he had told her that Nathan had become a problem he was going to resolve. She had not asked what he meant. She had told herself he meant he was going to talk to Nathan. She was no longer able to tell herself that. Outside on the street, walking back to Rachel's car, Emily did not speak for a full 2 blocks. Then she said, "He said Nathan was a problem he was going to resolve." "Yes," Rachel said. "That is not enough for a criminal charge, on its own." No, on its own it is not. But it is something the federal investigators can work with. It is a thread. And federal investigators are very good at following threads. Rachel unlocked the car. They got in. She did not start the engine immediately. She sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel. Emily, I need you to understand what this means for the next few weeks. Victoria cooperating with the federal investigation that changes the shape of the criminal case significantly. But it also means Richard is going to know very soon that his wife has turned, and that is going to make him more dangerous, not less. People who have been operating from a position of control and suddenly lose that control. I know, Emily said. We need to be careful, more careful than we've been. I know, Emily said again. Rachel started the car. They drove back to Oak Park in the particular silence of two people who have just learned something that made the world simultaneously clearer and more frightening. The danger arrived 4 days later, not as a physical threat, not as anything Emily could have anticipated or defended against in the way that word suggested. It arrived as a leak, someone, and it took Rachel less than 6 hours to establish that the source was almost certainly inside the Whitmore legal team. A junior associate who had subsequently been terminated leaked a story to 2 Chicago news outlets simultaneously. The story characterized Emily as a manipulative opportunist who had spent her marriage positioning herself for exactly this legal battle. It cited unnamed sources close to the family. It included specific personal details about Emily and Nathan's relationship that could only have come from someone with access to private communications. The articles went up at 6 in the morning. By 7:30, Emily's phone was full of messages from people she had not heard from in months. Old clients, college acquaintances, people who occupied the peripheral zones of her social world, forwarding the articles with varying degrees of sympathy and confusion. By 8, 2 members of the Whitmore Justice Foundation's nascent board. Emily had not yet announced the foundation publicly, but she had begun quietly discussing it with a small group of advisors had called to express concern. By 8:45, Rachel was at the Oak Park house with coffee and a look on her face that was entirely focused and not at all panicked, which Emily recognized as the version of Rachel she most needed right now. "This is desperation," Rachel said. "This is what it looks like when someone realizes the legal strategy is not going to work and reaches for the only other tool available. This is not an escalation of strength. This is an acknowledgement of weakness." "It doesn't feel like weakness," Emily said. "It feels like my name being dragged through every news feed in Chicago." "I know it does." Rachel set down the coffee. "And here is what we are going to do about it. Nothing." Emily stared at her. "Nothing," Rachel repeated. "We do not respond to the articles. We do not issue a statement. We do not call anyone back who has forwarded them to you. We let the articles exist, and we let them be what they are, a desperate move by a family under federal investigation. And in 11 days, we walk into that courtroom with everything we have, and we let the proceedings speak." "People are going to believe it," Emily said. "Some people will believe it," Rachel said. "Some people will believe it regardless of what the truth is, because that is the nature of people and the nature of stories that confirm what someone already suspects. But Emily, the people who matter to this proceeding, the people whose opinions determine the outcome of your case are in that courtroom. And in that courtroom what matters is evidence." She met Emily's eyes. "We have the evidence." Emily thought about it. She thought about Nathan, about the way he had moved through the last months of his life, carrying something he could not put down and could not share, not fully, because sharing it would have put her in danger. He had done that alone. He had done it without anyone to tell him that his strategy was right, that the evidence would be enough, that the truth would eventually work the way it was supposed to. She could survive 11 days. "Okay," she said. "Nothing." She kept that promise for 11 days. She did not respond to the articles. She did not answer the phone calls that were not Rachel or the small circle of people who had been inside this from the beginning. She worked. She helped Rachel prepare. She reviewed documents and organized exhibits and sat across from Rachel at that table until late into the night, and then got up the next morning and did it again. On the 7th day, Carol Ashworth called Rachel with something new. "She has a document," Rachel said, coming to find Emily immediately. "A transaction record that Nathan did not have in his files. A transfer from 2021, 2 years ago, to a personal account in the Cayman Islands, registered to a numbered company. The amount is $8 million, in a single transaction." Whose account? Rachel paused. The numbered company traces to Richard Whitmore personally, not through Whitmore Enterprises, not through any of the shell companies, directly, from the company to Richard's personal offshore account. Emily understood immediately what this meant. The shell companies were complex, layered, deniable. A sophisticated defense attorney could spend months constructing alternative explanations. But a direct transfer from a corporate account to a personal offshore account with no business purpose in the amount of $8 million, that was not complex, that was not deniable, that was theft in its most straightforward form. Does Fitch know she has this? Emily asked. I don't think so. She only found it last week going through records she kept from her time at the company, personal copies she made when she was still trying to decide whether to report what she was seeing. We need to get it to the federal investigators, Emily said. Already done, Rachel said. I called the U.S. Attorney's Office 30 minutes ago. On the 9th day, Gerald Fitch requested a meeting, not with the court, with Rachel, privately. They met in a coffee shop on Michigan Avenue at 9 in the morning, Rachel and Fitch, while Emily sat in the Oak Park house and counted the minutes with a precision that would have alarmed anyone watching her. Rachel called at 10:47. He offered a settlement, she said. Emily felt her jaw tighten. What settlement? Full transfer of trust authority to you, immediate unfreezing and release of all assets, a cash payment of $6 million for your legal costs and damages. Richard steps down from all board positions at Whitmore Enterprises. All legal challenges to the amendment are withdrawn. Rachel paused. In exchange for your agreement not to cooperate with or testify in any federal criminal proceeding against Richard Whitmore. The coldness moved through Emily again, slower this time, more complete. He wants me to protect him from the federal investigation, she said. Yes. By settling the civil case in a way that looks like a victory for me. Yes. And in exchange for everything Nathan built, everything he died trying to bring to light, Richard Whitmore gets to walk away from what he did. That is what he is offering, Rachel said, and I need you to tell me right now what your answer is. Emily did not hesitate. No, she said. Rachel was quiet for exactly 1 second. I was hoping you were going to say that, she said. 2 days before the hearing, Richard Whitmore was arrested. The federal investigators had been moving faster than anyone outside their office had known. Carol Ashworth's $8 million transaction record, combined with Victoria's cooperation and the 6 months of Nathan's original documentation, had given the Financial Crimes Division what they needed. A federal arrest warrant was issued at 6 in the morning. Richard Whitmore was taken from his home at 7:15. Emily learned about it the same way she had learned about the search warrant from Rachel calling before 8. Her voice careful and controlled, and underneath the control, something that sounded for the first time in all of this unmistakably like relief. Emily sat in the kitchen of the Oak Park house and listened to Rachel describe what had happened and did not say anything for a long time. Then she said Nathan's name. When the charges are filed, I want Nathan's name to be part of the public record. I want it to be clear that what Richard did to him, what Richard did to protect himself from what Nathan found, I want that to be part of this. The U.S. Attorney's Office has already told me, Rachel said quietly, that Nathan's investigation is being characterized as a significant part of the basis for the charges. His documentation, what he found, what he built, it will be in the public record. Emily pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment. She breathed. 2 more days, she said. 2 more days, Rachel said, and then we finish this. The morning of the evidentiary hearing, Emily woke at 4:43 and did not try to go back to sleep. She lay in the dark and thought about Nathan. Not about the case, not about the documents or the amendment or the federal arrest or any of the machinery that had consumed the last 7 weeks of her life. She thought about him specifically privately, the way she allowed herself to think about him only in the hours when no one was watching and there was no next task waiting. She thought about the way he made coffee, always too strong, always with the particular focused attention of someone who believed the small daily rituals of a life were worth doing correctly. She thought about the sound of his voice reading aloud, which he did sometimes on Sunday mornings from whatever he was working through that week, not because he wanted her to listen, but because thinking out loud helped him, and her presence was the condition under which he thought best. She thought about his hands. She thought about the specific weight of his arm across her shoulders, in the particular way he held her when something had frightened her, and he wanted her to know without saying it that he was still there. I was not still there. He would never be still there again. She had known this every day for the past 11 weeks. She had known it and kept moving because there was something to move toward, because he had left her something to do, because the work of following the chain he had built had given her a structure inside which the grief could exist without consuming everything else. Today, the work was almost finished. She got up. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table in the dark and drank it slowly the way Nathan never did, because he always drank coffee too fast and burned his mouth and was annoyed at himself for it. And she thought about how much she missed even that specific minor recurring irritation of loving a particular person. At 6:15, Rachel arrived. She did not knock loudly. She tapped twice the signal they had established in the second week, and Emily opened the door and handed her a cup of coffee, and Rachel accepted it, and they stood in the kitchen together without speaking for a moment, the way people who have been through something difficult together sometimes do not need to fill the space with words. "How are you?" Rachel asked. "I'm ready," Emily said. "That's not what I asked." Emily looked at her. "I know," she said. "I'm ready anyway." They went over everything one final time. Rachel had organized the presentation in a sequence that moved from the foundational, the 2005 amendment, Harold Brennan's testimony, Margaret Chu's certification through the evidentiary, the financial documentation, Carol Ashworth's statement, the $8 million transaction record, to the contextual Robert Whitmore's letter. Nathan's personal files, the full picture of what had been built and what had been hidden and what had been done to the man who tried to bring it to light. It would take the full day. Possibly longer. Rachel had prepared for 2 days. "Gerald Fitch has withdrawn from the case," Rachel said as they were finishing. Emily looked up. "When?" "Yesterday evening. His firm filed a notice of withdrawal. Richard's new attorney is a man named Thomas Hale. He specializes in federal criminal defense. He has almost no civil trust litigation experience." Rachel held Emily's gaze. "What this means is that the Whitmore family's civil case is now being managed by someone who is primarily focused on the criminal exposure. The civil case is no longer their priority. Managing Richard's criminal liability is their priority." Emily understood exactly what that meant. "They're going to let the civil case go," she said. "I think they may challenge minimally and focus their resources elsewhere," Rachel said carefully. "I don't want you to assume a clean path because courts are unpredictable, and Thomas Hale is a very good attorney even outside his specialty. But yes, the dynamic has shifted." Emily thought about Richard Whitmore sitting at that conference room table the first day, sliding the documents across to her with the certainty of a man who had already won. "Sign it, or we will make certain the entire city believes you killed my son for his money." She thought about the gavel in that first proceeding, which she had believed was closing a door on her life. She thought about Nathan's key in that small manila envelope. "Don't fight their lies. Find the truth." "Let's go," she said. The courtroom was different from the first proceeding in ways that were not subtle. The Whitmore family presence in the gallery was reduced to 2 board members and a corporate communications officer. The reporters were still there, more of them now, because the federal arrest had made this a news story of a different magnitude, but they were quieter, the way press tends to be quieter when they already know the shape of what is coming and are there to document rather than speculate. Harold Brennan was in the front row again, in the same blue suit with the same composed expression. Carol Ashworth sat 2 rows behind him, which was the first time Emily had seen her in person, a woman in her late 50s, with the careful posture of someone who had spent a long time being afraid and had recently decided to stop. Thomas Hale sat at the opposing table. He was younger than Fitch by at least 15 years, compact and attentive, the kind of attorney who did not waste motion. He looked at Rachel when she sat down with the evaluating attention of someone calibrating what he was facing. Rachel looked back with an expression that communicated precisely nothing. Victoria Whitmore was not in the courtroom. Emily had half expected her to be. She was not. Her separate counsel had filed a brief statement indicating that Victoria Whitmore supported the resolution of the civil proceeding in accordance with the court's findings and would not be contesting the trust amendment or its application. Emily read that statement twice before the hearing began. She thought about Victoria's face in that conference room, the break in the composure, the first genuine thing she had seen from that woman in 11 years of knowing her. "I needed you to know that I am sorry." She had not forgiven Victoria. She was not certain she ever would. But she understood that Victoria's decision to separate herself from Richard, to cooperate with federal investigators to file that statement, those were not small things. They were the decisions of a woman who had spent decades choosing silence and had finally, at enormous personal cost, chosen differently. People could do the wrong thing for a long time and still, at the last possible moment, do the right one. Judge Drummond entered at 9:02. He moved through the preliminary procedure with the efficiency of someone who had reviewed the materials thoroughly and had limited patience for repetition. He acknowledged the change in the petitioner's legal representation without comment. He noted Victoria Whitmore's filed statement. He confirmed that both parties were prepared to proceed. Then he looked at Rachel. "Counselor, you may begin." What Rachel did in the next 4 hours was the finest legal performance Emily had ever witnessed, and she understood that she was probably not equipped to fully appreciate it because she did not have the technical knowledge to recognize everything Rachel was doing. But she could feel it, the precision, the pace, the way each piece of evidence was placed, not just to make its own argument, but to set up the next one. The way the whole construction moved toward a conclusion that felt, by the time you arrived at it, not like a surprise, but like the only possible destination. Harold Brennan took the stand at 10:15 and held it for 47 minutes. He was patient and immovable and 81 years old, and he had been waiting 20 years to say what he said in that courtroom, and he said it with the particular authority of someone for whom the truth had become over 2 decades of carrying it the most important thing in the room. Thomas Hale cross-examined him for 18 minutes. He was skilled and respectful and did not land a single meaningful blow. Carol Ashworth testified for just over an hour. She was precise and specific and visibly nervous in a way that read not as unreliability, but as the nerves of a person telling the truth about something that had cost her a great deal. She described what she had seen inside Whitmore Enterprises over 4 years of work. She described the transactions. She described the pressure she had received when she asked questions. She described the document, the $8 million transfer to Richard's personal offshore account, and how she had found it and what she understood it to mean. When Hale cross-examined her, he challenged the provenance of the offshore account document. He suggested she might have misread the transaction. He suggested her memory of specific conversations was unreliable. Carol Ashworth looked at him steadily. "Mr. Hale," she said, "I kept copies of those records because I knew even then that what I was seeing was wrong and that the day might come when someone needed to know about it. I kept them for 4 years. I kept them through a job search that was significantly impaired by my departure from Whitmore Enterprises and through the legal costs of retaining my own attorney and through more than one moment when I genuinely considered just letting it go." She paused. "I did not let it go, because Nathan Whitmore came to me and told me that what he was doing mattered and asked me to keep what I had. And he was right that it mattered, so here I am." The silence after that was the kind of silence that does not need to be filled. The lunch recess was 45 minutes. Emily and Rachel ate sandwiches in a small conference room adjacent to the courtroom and did not talk about the case, which was Rachel's rule during recesses. The mind needed the separation, she said. Needed a few minutes of not being inside the work in order to return to the work at full capacity. They talked about Rachel's dog, who had apparently developed a complicated relationship with a neighbor's cat that occupied most of the neighborhood's emotional bandwidth. They talked about a restaurant in Wicker Park that Emily had loved and had not been to since Nathan died. They talked about small things, ordinary things, the texture of a regular life that Emily had not fully inhabited in 11 weeks. At the end of the recess, Rachel looked at her and said, "The afternoon is ours. Everything we have built leads to what happens in the next 3 hours. Are you ready to testify?" Emily set down her water. "Yes," she said. She took the stand at 2:17 in the afternoon. Rachel led her through it carefully. The marriage, the final months of Nathan's life, the morning he left the phone call at 2 in the morning, the 11 days after his death, before Richard summoned her to the study and told her there were complications. She led her through the conference room, meeting the threat, the walkout, the bookstore, the envelope, the key, the storage unit, and what was inside it. Emily answered every question with the stillness Nathan had taught her. Not flat, she did not perform composure, she did not feel. She let the room see what was real, the grief, the anger, the love that had driven every step of the 7 weeks since she had walked out of that conference room. She did not perform strength. She demonstrated it by simply telling the truth completely, without flinching from the parts that hurt the most. When Rachel asked her what she had felt standing in the storage unit for the first time, reading the labels on Nathan's boxes, Emily did not answer immediately. She thought about it honestly. "I felt like he was still in the room," she said. "Not in a way that was comforting exactly, in a way that was present. Like the thing he had been most afraid of telling me, he had finally found a way to tell me. And I understood standing there that he had not been keeping it from me because he didn't trust me. He had been keeping it from me because he was trying to protect me. Right up until the point when he realized he couldn't protect me anymore, and then he trusted me with all of it." Rachel let that sit. Then she asked, "And what did you do with that trust?" "I followed it," Emily said. "Every step." Thomas Hale's cross-examination lasted 51 minutes. I was professional and thorough, and he challenged every significant point: the circumstances under which she found the storage unit, the sequence of events leading to the 2005 amendment, her characterization of Richard Whitmore's behavior in the conference room. He was good. He was genuinely good, and Emily recognized it, and she answered every question with the same precision and completeness that Rachel had spent 3 weeks helping her to develop. He did not shake her. Not once. At 3:48, he finished. Rachel stood for a brief redirect. She asked Emily one question. "Mrs. Whitmore, what do you want the outcome of this proceeding to mean, not legally, not financially? What do you want it to mean?" Emily looked at the courtroom, at Harold Brennan in his blue suit, at Carol Ashworth with her careful posture, at the reporters with their notepads, and the board members who had come because they needed to see how this ended, and the ordinary people in the gallery who were there for reasons she could only guess at. She thought about Nathan. She thought about Robert Whitmore writing a letter at the end of his life because he had not been brave enough earlier. She thought about what she had told Victoria, "Not for me, for Nathan." "I want it to mean," she said, "that the truth Nathan built is the thing that survives. Not the money, not the family name. The truth. He risked his life to put it on the record. He deserves to have it on the record." Judge Drummond made a note. He looked at the courtroom. "We'll take a 15-minute recess," he said. "Then I'll hear closing arguments." The closing arguments took 43 minutes. Rachel spoke for 28 of them. She did not raise her voice. She did not appeal to emotion in any way that was manipulative or performative. She simply constructed the case methodically, completely, with the particular force that comes not from rhetorical flourish, but from absolute clarity. The 2005 amendment existed. It was valid. The conditions for its activation had been met. The evidence for those conditions was overwhelming and had been substantiated by multiple independent witnesses and confirmed by a federal criminal investigation that had resulted in the arrest of the acting trustee. The protection clause stated specifically what was to happen when those conditions were met. There was no legal ambiguity. There was only the question of whether the court would allow the document that Robert Whitmore had built into the foundation of his family's legacy to do what he had intended it to do. Thomas Hale spoke for 15 minutes and covered the procedural objections that remained, which were not insignificant technically, but which existed, as everyone in the room understood by this point, in a context that had rendered them insufficient. Drummond listened to both. Then he looked at the file for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Emily counted. Then he looked up. "The 2005 amendment to the Whitmore Family Trust is a validly executed legal document," he said. "Its existence has been established by independent witness testimony and third-party registration records. Its language is not ambiguous. The protection clause contained therein specifies the conditions under which trustee authority is suspended and assets are transferred to the surviving spouse of the direct heir. The evidence presented in this proceeding establishes to this court's satisfaction that those conditions have been met." He looked at Thomas Hale. "The petitioner's original claims to consolidated trustee authority are denied. The interim order freezing trust assets is lifted. Authority over the Whitmore Family Trust transfers, effective immediately to Emily Carter Whitmore as the surviving spouse of Nathan Whitmore." He paused. "This court further notes for the record that the evidence presented today, in conjunction with the federal criminal referral previously issued by this court, establishes a comprehensive record of fiduciary misconduct that directly harmed the interests of the rightful beneficiaries of this trust. The court commends the work of the respondents' counsel and acknowledges the particular courage of the witnesses who came forward in this proceeding. He looked at Emily directly. The court also acknowledges on the record that the evidentiary record presented in this case was substantially constructed by Nathan Whitmore prior to his death. His contribution to the establishment of truth in this matter is noted. He brought down the gavel. The sound moved through the courtroom like something physical. Emily sat completely still. She was aware of Rachel's hand on her arm. She was aware of the sound of the gallery, the movement, the voices, the particular controlled chaos of a public proceeding that has just reached its conclusion. She was aware of Thomas Hale rising to say something about the record, and Drummond acknowledging it, and the mechanical continuation of legal procedure around the moment she was inside. She was aware of Harold Brennan standing in the front row, his hands clasped in front of him, looking at her with the expression of a man who had waited 20 years for this and found that it felt exactly as it should. She was aware with a clarity that surprised her that she was not crying. She had expected if this moment came that she would cry. She had assumed that the weight of the 11 weeks would arrive all at once, and her body would release it in the way bodies release things that have been held too long. Instead, she felt very still, very clear, the way air feels after a storm has moved through and everything that was obscured is now simply visible. She turned to Rachel. Rachel was crying. Silently, 2 tears, the kind that escape the composure of someone who has held everything together for so long that the moment the work is done, the body simply does what it needs to do. She pressed her fingers to her eyes and composed herself in approximately 4 seconds, and then looked at Emily with an expression that was both professional and entirely human. "We won," Rachel said. "We won," Emily agreed. Outside the courtroom, in the same corridor where Richard Whitmore had cornered her 3 weeks ago and told her she had not won anything, reporters materialized again. This time Emily stopped. She gave a statement. It was not long. She had written it herself without Rachel's help in the early morning hours before the hearing began. She had written it thinking about Nathan and about Robert Whitmore's letter, and about Harold Brennan waiting 20 years to do the right thing, and about Carol Ashworth keeping copies of records she knew might one day matter. She said, "My husband built the case that established the truth in this proceeding. He did it alone over months at a cost that I am still coming to understand. What he built was not just evidence, it was an act of courage. The outcome today belongs to him. Whatever I do with what this court has restored to me, I will do in a way that is worthy of what he risked to make it possible." She did not take questions. She walked through the reporters the same way she had walked through them after the first hearing, not away from them, through them steadily, and came out the other side into the October afternoon. 3 weeks later, Emily returned to the bookstore on North Clark Street. She went on a Tuesday afternoon, which was the same day of the week she had been there the first time 11 years ago, when a man she did not yet know had asked her whether a journal was worth $800, and she had told him the truth. Arthur, the owner, looked up when she came in. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "Emily," she said. "Please." He nodded. She walked to the back of the store. She found the shelf. She found the large green book, the 1960s edition of the Collected Legal History of Illinois Property Law, still in its place, because no one had ever wanted to buy it. She pulled it from the shelf. She opened it to the inside cover where Nathan's envelope had been taped. The tape was still there, a small rectangle of adhesive, slightly discolored. The envelope was gone. Of course she had taken it. She ran her finger across the tape. She stood there for a moment. Then she replaced the book on the shelf precisely where it had been and turned around. A woman was standing at the end of the aisle. She was young, mid-30s maybe. She was holding a folder of documents pressed against her chest, and her eyes were red in the particular way of someone who has been crying recently and has stopped but has not fully recovered. She was looking at Emily with the expression of someone who recognizes a face from the news but is not certain whether to acknowledge it. Emily looked at her. "Are you all right?" she said. The woman shook her head. Not a denial. A release, the small movement of someone who has been holding something together and has just encountered an unexpected opening. "My husband's family," the woman said. "He died 6 months ago. They're saying I have no claim to anything. They have lawyers. They have money. Their attorney told me last week that I should accept whatever they offer, because no judge is going to rule in favor of someone with no resources against a family like theirs. Her voice broke on the last two words. She pressed her lips together. I don't know what to do. Emily was quiet for a moment. She thought about herself standing outside the Whitmore mansion 11 weeks ago with a box of her own belongings and $11 in an account that wasn't frozen. She thought about Rachel saying the Whitmores don't want to win this case, they want to bury you until you give up. She thought about what Nathan had left her. Not the trust, not the money, the understanding of what it meant to stand alone against the full weight of a powerful family and choose anyway to follow the truth. She took a step toward the woman. What is your name? She asked. Sarah, the woman said. Sarah, my name is Emily, and I want to tell you something that someone should have told me 11 weeks ago. She held the woman's gaze. The attorney who told you that no judge will rule in your favor against a family with money and lawyers, that attorney is counting on you to believe that. The moment you believe it, you have already lost. But it is not true. Evidence is true. Documents are true. The people who were there and who know what happened, they are true. And the truth is, the one thing a powerful family with unlimited resources cannot manufacture. She paused. Do you have anyone helping you, an attorney? I can't afford. I'm going to give you a phone number, Emily said. It belongs to an attorney named Rachel Morgan. Tell her Emily sent you. She will tell you honestly whether you have a case, and if you have a case, she will help you. Sarah looked at her. Her eyes filled again. Why would you do that? She said. Emily thought about Robert Whitmore's letter. A legacy is not protected by wealth. She thought about Harold Brennan in his blue suit waiting 20 years. She thought about Nathan at the kitchen table on the morning he left his hand on hers, his voice careful and low. She thought about what it meant to be trusted with something important and to carry it all the way to the end. Because someone once built something very carefully, she said, so that when the moment came, I would have what I needed to fight. And the only way to honor that is to make sure the same thing is true for the next person who needs it. She wrote Rachel's number on a page torn from the small notebook she carried in her bag. She handed it to Sarah. Sarah took it with both hands the way people take things they understand they are going to need. Emily walked to the front of the store. She bought the illustrated history of Chicago architecture that she had purchased the first time she came looking for the envelope. The book she had genuinely always wanted, the book that had given her something legitimate to carry out the door on the most important errand of her life. She said goodbye to Arthur. She walked out. She stood on the sidewalk in the October afternoon and felt the city moving around her, traffic voices, the ordinary, persistent machinery of a Thursday in Chicago, and she thought about Nathan one more time. Not with the particular ache of grief, not with the weight of what had been taken, with something else, something that felt, if she was honest with herself, like the specific warmth of being known, like the sensation of being trusted completely by the person who had understood her most clearly. He had known she would follow the chain. He had known she would find the key and the storage unit, and Rachel and Harold Brennan, and the truth that made everything possible. He had known because he knew her that she would not stop. The Whitmore Justice Foundation was incorporated 3 weeks later. Its stated purpose was to provide legal resources and advocacy support to individuals facing unjust estate and trust proceedings against institutional opposition. Its first staff attorney was a woman who had spent the past 2 years doing exactly this kind of work pro bono because she believed it mattered and had not yet found an organization willing to fund it properly. Its first client was a woman named Sarah. And the woman who had once stood in a courtroom watching a gavel come down on everything she had built, who had signed nothing and surrendered nothing and followed the truth all the way to the end, that woman understood finally what Nathan had always known. The most powerful thing in the world is not money. It is not a family name. It is not a room full of expensive lawyers or a trust document or a 400-year legal tradition that protects the people who already have everything from the people who deserve more. The most powerful thing in the world is a person who knows the truth and refuses to let it die. Emily Carter. Whitmore was that person, and she had only just begun.